Senator from Georgia.
I ask to speak for up to 5 minutes, as in morning business.
Without objection.
Mr. President, 5 years ago today, President Obama signed into law the Dodd-Frank Act. Following the 2008 financial crisis, Washington passed the 2,300-page bill, creating more burdensome regulations that did not solve the crisis and in many ways made it worse. We're going to hear a lot about the failures of the Dodd-Frank Act over the next few years. What was intended to rein in 5 major banks who led us into trouble in the 2008 crisis, the unintended consequences today are affecting thousands of small town and regional banks across our country. I rise today to speak about one agency created by the Dodd-Frank law, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, or the CFPB. While many Americans may not have heard of the CFPB before, they will in the future. This agency touches every aspect of people's lives, from credit card records, mortgage applications, student loans, car sales, and much more. The CFPB seemingly knows more about American consumers than we know about the very agency that is supposed to be protecting us. According to a report by the Government Accounting Office, every month the CFPB scrubs data on all credit card transactions, all debit card transactions, all consumer mortgage loans, all car loans, and hundreds of thousands of other personal financial information. This leads to several questions, Mr. President. Why are they collecting this information in the first place? How does collecting credit card statements help protect consumers? How secure is all this data? Unfortunately, we know very little about what the CFPB is doing with all of this sensitive information, except looking for additional opportunities to regulate. Remember, before 2009, we already had 6 prudential regulators mandated, among other things, to protect the consumer. And yet, as a result of 2008, instead of streamlining and consolidating, we actually added a 7th prudential regulator charged with consumer protection, the CFPB. Today, the CFPB operates on top of the existing regulators in addition to, not in replace of, these agencies, and already is doing their best at duplicating efforts among these other agencies. By design, Dodd-Frank ensured that the CFPB doesn't have the same oversight controls as other agencies. Currently, Congress doesn't even have control over how the Bureau spends its funds, or even is appropriated. The CFPB operates outside the regular appropriations process of Congress, which other independent agencies, like the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Federal Trade Commission, Consumer Protection and Safety Commission, and others, are all subject to. Why would any government agency with access to that much consumer data be unaccountable to Congress? Recently, I introduced legislation to help shed more light on this agency and bring the CFPB under the appropriations process of the U.S. Congress. The sheer volume of consumer data being collected by the CFPB is concerning and ripe for abuse. In fact, with the GAO and the Federal Reserve Inspector General, both have warned about the need for increased security. Without full congressional oversight, how can we be sure this consumer data is secure? What kind of records does the CFPB keep? How would we know if it's been compromised? We already have seen the devastating effects of data breaches all over our federal government and the damage it's doing to the American people. Across all sectors of our government, including the most recent OPM data breach impacting millions of Americans and some of our intelligence assets abroad, we've seen the potential exposure of extremely national security sensitive information. Also, we recently had a debate about privacy regarding the NSA metadata program. Many of my colleagues expressed outrage for the scope of the NSA program, even when the mission was protecting national security. We're now talking about an agency collecting massive amounts of personal consumer data, many times more data than the NSA programs. While the CFPB's goal claims to be consumer protection, for all we know, this information they're collecting is even more susceptible to security threats and security breaches. If there's one thing we can agree upon, We need to make sure all Americans' personal information is safe and secure, especially from Washington. If we were upset about privacy in the NSA debate, we should certainly be paying attention to what the CFPB is doing with this personal information today. Getting the CFPB under congressional oversight should not be a partisan issue, Mr. President. In order to protect consumers, we need to know what's going on in the very government agency tasked with protecting them. That's why we need to put in place more transparency, not less, more controls, more oversight. We can start by bringing the CFPB under congressional oversight immediately so we can actually protect consumers and stop the potential for abuse, fraud, or identity theft. While this agency was originally designed to protect consumers, one can only wonder how Washington, collecting so much personal information, will actually protect them. Mr. President, I'll be speaking much more on this topic as the weeks go by. Let it be said tonight, though, that on the 5th anniversary of Dodd-Frank, we're beginning to look at the unintended consequences of this rogue agency, the CFPB. I yield my time.